What if I told you the most dangerous lie you've been sold is that learning has an expiration date? That one day, after graduation, after promotions, after success, you're done? Here's the truth. The moment you stop learning, you start dying. Not physically, but mentally, professionally, financially. The world doesn't reward the smartest or the hardest working, it rewards the most adaptable. And adaptability isn't luck, it's a choice, a daily one. So let me ask you, when was the last time you learned something that changed you? So ladies and gentlemen, do you know what separates the people who survive from the ones who thrive in this world? Not their money, not their connections, not even their grades. It's their hunger to learn every single day. And let me tell you something very simple. If you stop learning, you stop growing. And when you stop growing, you start dying, mentally, professionally, and eventually financially. Every morning when you wake up, you have two choices. You can repeat what you did yesterday, or you can learn something new that moves you closer to who you want to be. You used to believe that education ends with a diploma, but the world doesn't care about your degree. It cares about your value, and that value increases only when you do. Read a book, watch a documentary, listen to a podcast, ask a question, make a mistake and study it. You see, education is no longer locked inside a school building. It's in your phone. It's in your failures. It's in the people you meet. The question is, are you paying attention? The most powerful investment you can make is not in real estate, not in crypto, not in stocks. It's in yourself. Because when you grow, everything around you grows. You want to be irreplaceable? Learn every day. You want to be respected? Share what you've learned. Do you want to lead? Start by leading your own mind. So here's my challenge to you. For the next 30 days, learn one new thing every single day, just one. And at the end of the month, look at who you've become. Educate yourself daily, not because someone told you to, but because your future is listening and it's hungry too. Often, people treat learning like a project with a deadline. Something you begin in childhood, cram in school, graduate from, and then finally escape. The phrase, "I'm done with school," becomes, for many, an unconscious declaration that they are also done with growth. But the truth is, real learning doesn't start in school, and it doesn't stop after graduation. It lives in what you do daily, not just in what you were once taught. Learning is not a phase you go through. It's a muscle. It's a mindset. It's a way of living. Think of the most successful people you admire. Look beyond their awards, fame, or wealth. You'll notice one shared trait, a relentless commitment to learning. They don't read books or attend seminars because they need a certificate. They do it because they've made curiosity a habit. While others are scrolling mindlessly, they are feeding their brains intentionally. And that's not talent, that's discipline. When you treat learning as a habit, you stop waiting for someone else to teach you. You become your own coach. You begin to see lessons in the ordinary, from conversations, mistakes, routines, even boredom. You develop a lens that looks at the world and asks, what can I learn from this? That habit becomes a superpower because while others plateau, you evolve. The school system trains many of us to expect structure, a syllabus, a teacher, a test. But life rarely works like that. Life doesn't send you a study guide before it punches you in the face. It tests you first, and then, if you're paying attention, teaches you why you failed. But that's why daily learning matters, because you're constantly preparing yourself for challenges that don't come with warnings. Habits are not built by intensity, but by consistency. You don't need to read 5 books a week. You don't have to watch 3-hour lectures every night. What you need is rhythm. 10 minutes a day spent learning something, anything, and adds up to more than you think. You don't become wise by accident. You become wise by small, repeated decisions. People often say, I don't have time to learn. But time isn't the problem. Priorities are. If you have time to check social media, you have time to read a paragraph. If you have time to watch a series, you have time to listen to a podcast. The issue is not availability, it's awareness. Most people think learning has to be formal, structured, and serious, but that's not how habits form. Learning sneaks into your life when you're curious, when you ask why instead of just nodding, when you open a book instead of opening an app, when you talk to someone smarter than you and listen instead of trying to sound clever. Learning happens when your ego steps aside and lets your mind take the driver's seat. One of the most dangerous beliefs is the idea that intelligence is fixed, that some people are just smart and others aren't. The truth? Intelligence is often just the byproduct of repeated effort. The people who seem to know everything weren't born that way. They just never stopped asking questions. In today's world, the rules change fast. Industries evolve, skills expire. What you learned 5 years ago might be outdated today. That's why daily learning isn't just a personal growth strategy, it's a survival skill. Those who adapt win. Those who freeze fall behind. And the difference isn't luck or background, it's how committed you are to learning something new every day. Over time, this habit does something powerful. It rewires your brain, it sharpens your thinking, it improves your communication, it expands your ability to solve problems, connect dots, and generate ideas. It doesn't just make you smarter, it makes you more confident. Because the more you know, the more you realize you can learn anything. And when you believe that, there's no challenge too big, no change too fast, no goal too high. In a world overflowing with information, simply reading is no longer enough. Every day we scroll through headlines, consume tweets, glance at quotes, and binge watch video summaries. But how much of it actually sticks? How much changes our perspective or sharpens our thinking? The truth is, reading without reflection is like eating without digesting. You might feel full, but you haven't truly absorbed anything of value. That's why the habit of reading must be paired with something deeper, reflection. It's the process of pausing after you consume information and asking yourself what it means, how it applies to your life, and what you're going to do with it. Reflection turns reading from passive intake into active transformation. It's what separates a person who knows a lot from someone who understands deeply. Imagine you read a book on leadership. Without reflection, you might highlight a few quotes, nod at some ideas, and then move on to the next book. But with reflection, you stop after each chapter and ask, how does this apply to the way I lead today? You begin to see patterns in your behavior, blind spots in your communication, and opportunities to grow. That's when reading becomes powerful, when it turns into a mirror. The second part of this process is repetition, because learning isn't something you do once, it's something you do again and again until it becomes part of you. The best thinkers revisit the same ideas multiple times, from different angles. They don't chase novelty just for entertainment. They revisit truths because each time they reflect, they discover a deeper layer. You can read the same book 3 times, in 3 different seasons of your life, and walk away with 3 entirely different lessons. Why? Because you've changed. Your mindset is different, your challenges are different, so the meaning you extract shifts accordingly. That's the power of reading with reflection and repetition. It evolves with you. This habit isn't just about books. It applies to everything. Articles, podcasts, conversations, documentaries, even your own journal. After you read something, don't rush to the next thing. Pause. Ask yourself, what stood out? What challenged my thinking? What felt uncomfortable or unfamiliar? That discomfort is where growth lives. Most people skip this part because it takes effort. But this is where wisdom is built. Not in the act of reading, but in the act of wrestling with what you've read. Repetition doesn't mean redundancy. It means reinforcement. Just like you don't go to the gym once and expect to be fit, you can't read an idea once and expect it to change your mindset. You have to return to it, reflect again, apply it, and allow it to settle into your actions. That's how knowledge turns into habit. That's how insights turn into impact. We live in a culture that celebrates speed. Speed of reading, speed of consuming, speed of moving on. But learning isn't a race. Reading 10 books quickly is less powerful than reading 1 book deeply and applying its lessons. The depth of your reflection determines the strength of your retention. Some of the most effective learners keep journals, not to write down what they did that day, but to explore what they've read and how it relates to their goals, fears, values, and decisions. Writing is a form of reflection. When you write, you think more clearly, you process more deeply, you expose assumptions, you connect dots you didn't see before. You don't need to be a genius to grow, you need a system. And read, reflect, repeat is that system. It's a loop that fuels clarity, creativity, and confidence. When it becomes a habit, your perspective sharpens, your thinking matures. You begin to anticipate problems instead of react to them. You develop a quiet kind of wisdom, the kind that isn't loud but undeniable. It shows up in how you speak, how you make decisions, and how you lead yourself and others. Failure is one of those words most people try to avoid. It carries shame, disappointment, and often silence. From an early age, we're taught to associate failure with something negative, a red mark on a paper, a rejection letter, a missed opportunity. We're conditioned to fear it, to hide it, to pretend it didn't happen. But here's the truth. Failure is not the opposite of success. It is part of success. It is one of the most honest, effective, and sometimes brutal teachers we will ever have. When you succeed, you celebrate. But when you fail, you evaluate. That evaluation, that uncomfortable self-assessment, is what drives real growth. Success often feels good, but teaches little. Failure feels painful, but holds depth. It's in those moments when something breaks, when something doesn't go your way, that you are forced to confront what needs improvement. Your thinking, your strategy, your preparation, or sometimes even your character. Most breakthroughs, innovations, and powerful ideas didn't come from people who got it right on the first try. They came from people who tried, fell short, learned, and adjusted. They didn't see failure as an end, they saw it as feedback. They didn't let it define them, they let it refine them. Failure, when looked at with the right mindset, becomes a disguised education, the kind of education that leaves a permanent imprint. Think about any meaningful skill you've developed: walking, speaking, writing, leading, negotiating, building relationships. You didn't get any of those right the first time. You stumbled, you misunderstood, you said the wrong thing. And each time you did, you learned. Not through a manual, but through experience. That is failure working as an invisible teacher, shaping you without a classroom, without a textbook, and often without your permission. The challenge is not failing itself. The challenge is our attitude toward it. Some people treat failure like a dead-end sign. Others treat it like a detour. That difference in mindset makes all the difference in outcomes. If you allow failure to paralyze you, to damage your self-worth, to convince you to quit, it wins. But if you look at it and ask, what is this teaching me? It becomes a mentor. Failure teaches you what doesn't work, which is just as important as knowing what does. It sharpens your judgment, it forces creativity, it exposes weaknesses in your assumptions, your execution, or your strategy. That exposure, though uncomfortable, is exactly what leads to refinement. You make better choices after failure. You listen more carefully. You prepare more thoroughly. You approach challenges with more humility and awareness. There's also a kind of resilience that only failure can teach. No book or podcast can give it to you. It's something you earn by going through the fire, by getting knocked down and deciding to get back up again. That process builds internal strength. It rewires your relationship with fear. The next time you attempt something risky, you remember that you've survived failure before and grown from it. That memory gives you courage. In professional life, some of the best leaders are those who have failed publicly and painfully. Not because they're perfect now, but because they've learned to lead with empathy, with realism, and with a sense of accountability. They don't hide their failures. They use them as case studies, both for themselves and for the people they mentor. They understand that failure isn't just personal, it's practical. It carries data, if you're willing to look at it closely enough. Failure also teaches patience. It forces you to slow down, reassess, and move with more thought. That pause is often where wisdom is formed. It may feel like you're stuck, but in reality, you're being retrained, reshaped, and redirected. You're learning what persistence looks like, what adaptation feels like, and what it means to move forward without certainty, but with conviction. In a world driven by speed, technology, and endless competition, it's easy to think that success belongs only to those with the best connections, the most money, or the flashiest credentials. But beneath all the noise, one truth continues to prove itself over and over again. The person who knows more, adapts faster, thinks deeper, and solves problems better wins. Your knowledge, not your background, is your real advantage. It's what separates you from the average. It's what gives you a sharp edge in a world full of dull noise. Every day, industries are shifting. New tools are emerging. Trends are changing. What worked yesterday might be irrelevant tomorrow. In this kind of environment, your knowledge isn't just helpful, it's your armor. It allows you to stay ahead of change instead of getting blindsided by it. When others are guessing, you're moving with clarity. When others are reacting, you're anticipating. That's the edge knowledge gives you. Not just intelligence, but foresight. You don't need to know everything. You need to know more than most people in the areas that matter. Whether it's sales, coding, design, leadership, negotiation, or any other skill, deep knowledge in a specific domain gives you leverage. It makes you the person others rely on. It makes you valuable in rooms where decisions are made. And value, not noise, is what creates opportunity. The mistake many people make is believing that knowledge is a one-time achievement. They get a degree or a certification and treat it like a finish line. But in reality, knowledge is a moving target. It demands constant updating. What you knew last year might already be outdated this year. That's why the true winners are the ones who commit to continuous learning. They read, they study, they ask questions, they attend workshops, they listen to podcasts, they take online courses. Not because someone tells them to, but because they understand that staying sharp is their responsibility. Knowledge also builds confidence, not the loud, arrogant kind, but the quiet, grounded kind. When you know what you're talking about, you don't need to pretend, you don't need to bluff or impress.
You simply speak with clarity. That clarity makes people listen, it earns trust, it allows you to lead. And in a world full of uncertainty, people gravitate toward those who seem to understand what others don't. There's also a hidden layer to this edge. When you commit to gaining knowledge, you develop mental discipline. You train your mind to go deeper, to focus longer, to resist distraction. You become someone who doesn't just skim the surface, but understands how systems work, how ideas connect, and how trends unfold. That mental discipline doesn't just make you more capable, it makes you more creative. Because when you have a wide base of knowledge, you can draw from it to form new insights, make new connections, and solve problems in ways others can't see. In any competitive space, business, academia, sports, entertainment, even relationships, people are drawn to those who bring insight. Insight comes from depth, and depth is the product of consistent, intentional learning. The more you know, the more you're able to offer. The more you're able to offer, the more you stand out. You don't have to be the loudest, you just have to be the most prepared. And preparation is built on knowledge. When challenges arise, it's the knowledgeable person who sees the pattern. When opportunities appear, it's the knowledgeable person who recognizes the signal. When confusion spreads, it's the knowledgeable person who creates clarity. This ability to understand faster, adapt quicker, and execute smarter. It's not luck, it's the reward of learning. When others are relaxing, reading. While others are scrolling, thinking. While others are reacting, knowledge gives you the ability to walk into any room, any meeting, any situation, and contribute something meaningful. It gives you the confidence to pitch your ideas, challenge assumptions, and stand your ground with logic, not emotion. It makes you someone who doesn't just follow the game, but understands how it's played and how it can be changed. One of the most overlooked truths about learning is that it deepens not when we absorb knowledge, but when we try to pass it on. Most people think teaching is something you do only after you've mastered a subject, that you need years of experience or formal qualifications to explain something to others. But in reality, teaching is not just a way to share what you know. It's one of the fastest, most effective ways to truly understand what you're trying to learn. When you teach something, even informally, you're forced to organize your thought. You can't just rely on vague understanding or scattered facts. You have to put concepts into order. You have to simplify complex ideas, break things down, and explain them in a way someone else can grasp. That process alone reveals the gaps in your knowledge. It shows you where you're unclear, where your logic is shaky, and where your explanations fall apart. It pushes you beyond memorization and into real comprehension. Teaching is also a form of active learning. It requires engagement, attention, and interaction. When you're teaching someone else, you become more present with the material, you ask better questions, you anticipate confusion, you sharpen your language. Passive learning, like reading or listening, can create the illusion of knowledge, but the moment you try to teach, that illusion disappears. You either understand it or you don't. And if you don't, that's the best place to start improving. There's a reason why some of the smartest people in the world constantly explain what they know, not because they want to impress others, but because it reinforces their own learning. Explaining something forces your brain to retrieve it, connect it with other ideas, and express it in your own words. That effort strengthens the neural pathways tied to that knowledge. The more you teach, the more those ideas become internalized. Even informal teaching, like helping a friend understand a concept, posting a summary online, leading a study group, or writing about what you've learned, counts. You don't need a classroom or a stage. All you need is the willingness to share. In doing so, you're not just giving others value, you're reinforcing your own understanding in ways passive studying never could. Teaching also builds humility. It reminds you that mastery isn't about knowing everything, but being able to admit when you don't. Opens the door to feedback, questions, and different perspectives. Sometimes, while teaching, someone else's question forces you to rethink your assumptions or dive deeper into areas you hadn't considered. This back and forth sharpens your thinking and broadens your view. In team environments, teaching creates a culture of collaboration. When people are encouraged to share what they know, silos break down, confidence grows. A junior employee explaining a new tool to a senior one isn't just transferring skill, they're building trust and showing initiative. And the teacher benefits just as much as the learner because the act of explaining requires ownership and accountability. Teaching also builds communication skills. You can be a genius in your field, but if you can't articulate your ideas clearly, your knowledge stays locked inside. Teaching teaches you how to simplify, how to listen, how to read the room, and trains you to tailor your message depending on your audience, a skill that's just as valuable in meetings, interviews, negotiations, and leadership as it is in education. There's also a psychological shift that happens when you teach. You move from the identity of a student to that of a contributor. You stop just consuming and start creating. That shift builds confidence. It reinforces the idea that your voice matters, your knowledge has value, and your perspective can help someone else move forward. Even if you're still learning yourself, you can always teach someone who's a few steps behind you. In conclusion, in a world that never stops changing, daily self-education is no longer a luxury, it's a necessity. Whether it's through reading, reflecting, teaching, or even failing forward, the act of learning must become part of your daily rhythm. The goal isn't perfection, it's progress. Every piece of knowledge you gain becomes a tool, a layer of strength, and a source of clarity. The more you learn, the more capable you become, not just in your career, but in your thinking, your decisions, and your ability to adapt when things don't go as planned. The people who rise are not always the ones with the most talent, but the ones who choose to stay curious. They treat every experience, good or bad, as a lesson. They understand that knowledge isn't static, it's a living force that grows with effort, intention, and time. So build that habit.
Ladies and gentlemen, the choice is clear. You can either let the world outpace you, or you can commit to outlearning it every single day. This isn't about degrees, luck, or talent. It's about discipline. It's about waking up each morning and asking, what will I learn today that moves me forward? It's about treating failure as tuition Curiosity as fuel and knowledge as your greatest weapon. The future doesn't wait for the unprepared. It rewards those who are ready, those who've sharpened their minds, expanded their skills, and built the habit of relentless growth. So I leave you with this challenge. Don't just consume life, dissect it. Don't just experience it, study it. Because in the end, the only thing standing between who you are and who you want to be is what you're willing to learn next. The world belongs to the learners. The question is, do you? Go get hungry.